Hello everyone, just like to say hello for the Making Ripples event. Apologies I can't be with you in person, but because of the lockdown, coronavirus restrictions and what have you, the only way I could be here today is through a pre-recorded video. I hope you're all staying safe in these unusual times. I'm a graduate of the University of Central Lancashire. I graduated this last summer of a business and marketing degree, and I am now a master's student at UCLan doing a international business and management master's degree. And I've been asked to speak to you all about some of my experience as a student with a hidden disability, as I have Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism, and give you guys perhaps some tips or tricks that may help you in your career and in your journey towards securing your career and what have you. So, to give you a bit of my background, I was a mature student when I joined UCLan, so I'd done a bit of work in a few different sectors. So I'd worked in warehouses, I'd worked in the care sector, I'd worked in offices as administration assistant. I'd done a lot of odd jobs before coming to university, and I came to university because a lot of the places where I had worked, the offer for moving up the company was restricted in that you had to have a degree to move up the chain. And I started off with a foundation year because I wasn't sure if university was for me, as I wasn't the best academically in secondary school or high school, whatever you want to call it. And from that transitioned to a regular 3-year degree with business and marketing. And within that, I also did a placement year. So it meant I did 5 years as an undergraduate at UCLan. So starting off with the placement. So this is a year where I took a year out to work in industry in between years 2 and 3. So I did year 1, year 2, placement year, year 3. And this was very useful and if anyone listening to this is in the prospect of potentially doing a placement or an internship, I highly recommend you do, because a lot of employers now are not just looking for the degree certification, but they also want industry specific experience. So if you're training to be perhaps a economist or a lawyer or something along those lines, they may look at your CV and say, oh, you've got a 2-1 or a first in your lawyer degree, but you only have work experience in a pub, so we're not going to have you. Whereas if you come in and say, you had a placement year in a law office and you have the certification, then you're way above the majority of your competitors in the job market. Now, when it comes to actually looking for placements, I should stress I did mine in the academic year 2018 to 2019, so this is pre-coronavirus, and I found it incredibly challenging to secure a placement. To give an idea, before I secured a placement with Skipton Building Society, I had applied for about 40 jobs, 40 placement schemes. And this ranged from huge multinational companies all the way to rather small, local organizations. And as somebody with a learning disability, I'd like to give potential tips to both students in the room and employers in the room. So the tip to students in the room is try not to take any rejections you take to heart. A lot of companies will get hundreds, if not thousands of applications, and they will sift through and remove applications willy-nilly or at whim or without a second glance. So it's not a personal reflection on you as a person that you didn't get through to the next stage. So the next part of that is, please try to keep true to yourself and to keep your motivation and resolve there, because it can be extremely disheartened, it can be extremely saddening when you're on say for my instance, application 37, and you've been rejected for many reasons. The one I found most infuriating was due to a lack of experience, which, you know, a lot of these companies are applying advertising to students, many of whom who've come from school and may not have much or any work experience. So I kind of question where those employers were thinking they were getting their stock from, their prospective employees from. For employers, my tip would be to try and stay away from, in particular, things like outsourcing, or to try and keep away from situations where you're putting multiple barriers between yourself and the prospective applicants. Whilst it may take more time for you to sift through and find the applicant that's right for you, ultimately you're doing an investment within human capital. And if you invest well in that human capital, it's going to pay off tremendously. And I'd like to think that, especially with the increasing use of artificial intelligence, that we don't move to such a system right away, because although we discuss a lot of things like human bias and things along the lines of impact training, artificial intelligence may seem like the solution, but the artificial intelligence is programmed by humans who have unconscious bias and who are flawed. So I'd like you guys to keep that in mind if you're an employer. So I think the next section is once in a placement, or once within an internship or any kind of job. And that is how you integrate yourself. And I guess it's easy to say, go out there, say hello to everyone, but perhaps if, like me, you struggle with that, try and set yourself minute goals every day. So maybe you say, at least once a week, I'll say hello to somebody new in the office. If it's you're working remotely like this, perhaps it's a case of chatting with colleagues a bit more over the chat function in, say, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Slack, whatever communication channels you guys have whilst working remotely, as we are currently. And for employers, if you are dealing with an individual with a disability, it's a case of just taking the time to listen. And I'll give an example. Some employers believe that employing disabled people is a risk because of reasonable adjustments. So to give you an example, whilst I worked at Skipton Building Society, we worked in a large open plan office, which was slightly problematic for my sensory processing, as in I would overhear lots of different conversations and I would struggle to think and process on my work at my desk. So the reasonable adjustment was I would wear noise cancelling headphones, which I bought myself, which I owned myself. So it cost the company zero. And that meant that my productivity went really high. And my colleagues, I informed them to say, if you want to get my attention, just give us a little nudge, just wave in front of the screen. So it wasn't a detriment as far as the colleague collaboration goes. So it's having little conversations like that, which at first could seem daunting and think, oh my goodness, how are we going to adapt the workplace to be accessible, when one simple conversation later, it's solved. So don't be nervous about having these conversations. So the next thing I want to talk about is, after my time at Skipton Building Society over that year, I did a follow-up internship abroad in New York's financial district, working beside Wall Street and the Bronze Bull and what have you. And this was an incredible fish out of water moment, because I'm someone who doesn't necessarily, I can cope with change, but if you know about autism, we tend not to respond great to change. So to go to a completely different currency, working culture, working environment, geography, everything was a big wow moment. But I did it as a kind of way to challenge myself. And whether you guys decide to do work internationally or not, I'd like to think that everyone should try and push themselves in some way, shape, or form. But again, it doesn't have to be grand, it doesn't have to be a mountain. It can just be as simple as speaking up maybe a bit more in team meetings or in group work at university. And whilst working at the Skipton Building Society and Primary, which was the organisation I worked for in New York, I did a lot of work around autism advocacy, a lot of work surrounding my field, which is digital marketing, digital conventional or traditional marketing, and business strategy. And it's important to try and gauge opportunities that go into your field, your expertise, your interest. It would be no good if you asked me to do an internship in a manufacturing plant of doing engineering, because as much as I try, I'm not that much of an engineer. Whereas you wouldn't expect an engineering student to do a placement in a marketing or business related office when their skill set is surrounding engineering in particular. So the next thing I want to discuss, and this applies for both employees, employers, and students, is trying to become adaptable. So I mentioned I graduated in the summer of last year, and my intent was to not carry on with education. I was going to get a job, and I wanted to start a grown-up life. I wanted to look to buy a property, start a career, start a family, all those kind of things. But the coronavirus pandemic threw a spanner in most works, and after nearly 100 applications from jobs ranging to working in a career setting environment, all the way to entry-level jobs, which in whatever sector, I realised things were going to be very difficult. So I adapted and decided to do my master's at UConn for a year to hopefully wade out the worst of the pandemic and of Brexit due the beginning of next year. And what I'd say to people is try and think of at least a plan B. So you've got plan A, which is perhaps you want to go and work for Barclays Bank or BAE Systems or the charity shop down the road from you, wherever it is you want to work. Think of at least a plan B, if not a plan C, and think, right, well, if I can't get that job at the bank or at the charity shop or at the manufacturing plant, then I'm going to think of one or two of the things I could feasibly do. Because if you don't make contingency plans, it will make things more difficult for you if your first priority isn't realised. And I'd like to say that a lot of it requires a lot of resilience and flexibility and a lot of character, a lot of character to be able to adapt, endure, because what a lot of people I don't think realise is that looking for work and opportunities is a very demanding full-time job in of itself. So what I'd like to summarise is to trust in people, trust in yourself, remember that rejection isn't always a bad thing. Just think to yourself, okay, they haven't selected me, it's not personal, I'll move on to the next one. Next, I've already kind of mentioned this into trust in yourself, employers, trust in your people and your prospective people, because if anything, the early pandemic showed to us is that people power is key, whether that's the flexibility of working from home, whether that's people giving care packages to their vulnerable friends and neighbours, we have to be true to ourselves and to us, to our colleagues and our communities. So I'd like to finish here. Thank you so much for your time. I'd like to encourage you all to connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Richard Crake. If you guys would like to have a conversation, a chinwag, whatever you like to call it. I appreciate your time today, and I hope everyone stays safe. Thank you.